Hi, in this video I'll share some tips and tricks for using WARP to get you started creating your own sounds and making the most of WARP's deep feature set. If you're not familiar with WARP's audio engine, be sure to check out the video link above for an in-depth exploration of all its features. Now let's go through the tips and tricks to give you an overview and some inspiration when exploring WARP. WARP doesn't feature an arpeggiator, but you can use this technique to create similar results. I created several spectra, each featuring a single frequency. In this case, only odd multiples of the fundamental. Then I'm using the LFOs with a rectangular shape to jump between those spectra, creating this kind of pseudo arpeggiator. You can use the Galaxy to simulate classic low-pass or high-pass filter effects. In this setup, I've designed the spectra in the upper row of the Galaxy to reduce low frequencies from left to right. While the spectra in the lower row gradually reduce high frequencies from right to left. You can create filter sweeps by modulating the X position with LFOs or envelopes. This technique can be useful as this pseudo filter sits earlier in the signal chain before the spec and warp sections, so it behaves differently to the actual filters. It might seem obvious, but designing the spectra in the Galaxy with a clear intention can be very helpful. Consider whether you want a wide variety of timbres or just subtle variations of one specific timbre. For example, when creating pad sounds, I prefer to design spectra that are only slightly different from each other, and then modulate the XY position only with slow movement. In contrast, a broader variety of spectra works well for wobbly sounds and fast modulation. Place wavetable mode is a quick way to create a broad variety of spectra in the Galaxy, especially when using some of the experimental samples that are provided with WARP or when setting the distance of wavetables to odd values. When creating the spectra in the Galaxy, you don't always have to include the fundamental frequency. This way you can create sounds that are more inharmonic. In additive mode, reduce frequencies at F1 and above. The more upper harmonics you add, the more inharmonic the spectrum becomes. The AI generator for the Galaxy also allows you to quickly create spectra that emphasize only upper harmonic content. Keep in mind though, you may want to transpose warp down a few octaves to compensate for the missing low frequencies in the spectra. The bend, fold, drive and redux effects can be controlled using the warp control. When the base value is negative, like here for the fold effect, the effect only engages once the control passes the 0% mark. The bend value is controlled in the first half of the knob's range and the fold value is controlled in the second half. This way you can create stages of effect settings. You can set up the control so that no effect is active at the 12 o'clock position of the warp knob. Moving it to the left activates one effect, while moving it to the right brings in another. You can use the detune control to crossfade between oscillators 1 and 2. Here, oscillator 1 of all 4 voices is tuned to the same note. When turning up the detune control, oscillator 2 gradually blends in. It is tuned to different notes for each voice to form a chord. This way, you can smoothly transition between a monophonic and a paraphonic sound. In monophonic mode, warp lets you adjust each of the 2 oscillators across the 4 voices individually, giving you control over a total of 8 oscillators. You can even set each oscillator's pitch independently. In this example, I've added random pitch modulation to each oscillator using the amount control, creating a super fat chorus effect. You can use the speed control to change the shape of the envelopes as well as the speed of the LFOs. On the note of making the patch easily comprehensible, I typically choose only one of the 2 options. For example, I might adjust the envelope shapes to transition from a lead sound to a pad sound. Or I could change the speed of the LFO for classic wobble basses. The LFOs provide 2 random waveforms, a stepped and a smooth one. They operate independently per voice. I like to use them, for example, to distribute the voices across the galaxy. This creates a rich sound with a lot of timbre variation between the voices. WARP is quite deep and invites you to explore various sound spheres, and that's part of the fun. However, it can be easy to lose track and overdo it by trying to utilize all of WARP's features at once. When creating a sound, for example to use in a live performance, I go about it in 2 steps. First, I focus on crafting the sound I have in mind in the simplest way possible, without mapping any of the macros: spec, warp, detune, amount and speed. Once I'm satisfied with the sound as a baseline, I then map the macros to create variations. These 2 steps also reflect a key concept behind WARP's design. You can take your time to dive into the details of all the parameters in the menus. And when it's time to perform, you can use the controls for quick access to many parameters all at once without need to look at the screen.